Now let's turn our attention to the issue of culture as a global public good and why the world celebrates cultural diversity for dialogue and development. You may wish to ask, why does cultural diversity matter? Well, now let's get some perspectives on this from the Executive Secretary and Chief Executive Officer of the National Institute for Cultural Orientation, Otumba Biodun Ajiboye. Yes, thank you so much for coming on Insight.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
I would like for us to begin this conversation on cultural diplomacy, especially as a tool for global public good. I mean, you would agree, I would, and most people would readily agree that globalization has largely impacted positively in breaking barriers and building bridges amongst nations of the world. But I am not naive enough to proclaim that it has completely wiped the slate clean. And there are no more prejudices and biases and misunderstanding amongst people of the world. You know, but I want to believe and think that in celebrating the cultural diversity for dialogue and development, that the message, lies between a greater appreciation of people's backgrounds, and for people to no longer see each other as strange bedfellows, but as individuals with common feelings, common understanding, and common worldview. Is that right?
Considerably, you are very correct. And I'll tell you something. Culture is one of those very strong things, fundamental things that melt people's hearts. Whether you are in government, whether you are in business, whether you are whatever, because everybody's culture comes highly respected by everybody. Hardly would you see any environment filled with sanity that would disrespect its own culture or other people's culture, except there's a reason. I would not stand here and say cultures are not disrespected. If cultures are not disrespected, there will not be wars around the world. But the truth of the matter is that the theory of cultural diplomacy basically is, let us use culture to deepen intergovernmental or international relationship or good diplomatic relationship among nations. And culture has been one tool that has been used considerably to achieve global peace. As a matter of fact, between you and I, when the concept of Millennium Development Goals was conceived in the year 2000, erroneously or otherwise, culture was significantly omitted. And by 2001, UNESCO, and now an organ of United Nations, recognized the absence of culture as a grave danger to global peace and global development. So they came up with a declaration on cultural diversity. And of course, that was 2001. By 2002, they already appreciated the fact that 21st of May should be declared as World Culture Day. You see, so it's an attempt to rectify an initial error, because culture is one of the tools that everybody wants to use around the world to bring global peace. This is why any serious government anywhere in the world which had not taken culture into consideration in their global and policy formulation processes, they go back to the drawing board to recognize culture. Because the Chinese appreciated that culture is a fundamental part of life, and they embedded, inculcated, and imbued culture into their diplomatic
and that has been a
plans.
catalyst for their development, I should say.
Basically. So we are here today at this juncture to tell the Nigerian people that we cannot afford to ignore our culture if we really want peace and development. So the gospel according to cultural diplomacy.
I thought you were going to say the gospel according to Otumba.
No, not at all, not at all. I am an officer, I'm a servant of the government. So therefore, anything I say is to put government in good light. This is just the way it is. So we are preaching everywhere to say, look, we cannot afford to ignore our culture. Unfortunately, the Nigerian space, government and others, have seen culture as mere entertainment. When you have August visitors, line them up in costumes and let them dance. The second part and most disturbing part is the fact that the Nigerians see culture as voodoo. And it is not just that. Culture is a way of life. Nothing can be achieved without culture.
Let's double down on this. I mean, when you raise the issue of culture, there's a mix between culture and traditions there. And you said some people see culture as voodoo. As far as we know, as far as I know, culture, or as far as culture is concerned, and since I became even more aware, maybe I should say, having had the opportunity to travel more than my immediate environment now and having experienced other cultures, I became, more intrigued by this debate over culture and the crisis of identity. Culture, of course, like you've said, is an amalgam of all that constitutes us as a people. Besides even these traditions and, even including our ancestries and, maybe, our past, and it even tells us where we're headed to. But I would like to ask you, and this is where the issue of labeling comes into play now, as far as culture is concerned, and it's also a debate, and I wonder what your view will be or is on this subject matter. The debate essentially is on the issue of, on the issue of culture and labeling. And I'll give you an example. Who, for instance, determines or labels me to be who I am? Who says, for instance, that, is my, who defines who I am as culturally? Does the word, are we what the word sees us as? Do I simply, for instance, accept it, who the word says I am, because they see me in a certain light, and so that makes that perspective becomes my identity? Or do I, or we, say or determine who we are with our culture and culturally?
Whoever you are, whoever the world perceives you to be, whoever you perceive yourself to be, whoever your environment perceives you to be, is a function of cultural appreciation and understanding of who you are. Your culture defines you. It doesn't matter who you are. Unfortunately, the African culture had been subject to a lot of global conspiracy. The world, for some reason, tries to put Africa down in the area of our cultural renaissance and understanding and appreciation. But Africa has got a right to put itself up, and begin to say, you are misunderstanding my culture considerably. My culture is the best. My culture does not preach war. My culture does not preach cannibalism. My culture is not as primitive as you claim, as you want to believe. My culture is a culture of respect, is a culture of honesty, is a culture of is a forward-looking culture to development. And if you look at it, let's take Nigerian for instance. Let me give you a proverb in my native dialect. They said, "Ẹni tó gbàgbé ilé ó so àpò ìyàkọ́. Whomsoever forgets his roots has only succeeded in hanging the pouch of his suffering, and someday you talk it off the wall." That means that if you neglect your culture, you're only postponing the evil day about yourself. So, culture is one thing we need to take along ourselves with development.
So the assertion now is that culture as an identity is typically defined by us and not the way the world sees us.
Not at all. So, but we need to propagate. The world is a global village. Everybody must propagate his own belief system, his own identity, his own culture. I mean, for instance, as young people, we never danced Nigerian, we never listened to Nigerian music. In fact, as a matter of fact, as a secondary school boy, Nigerian music is for the lower people that are lower in intelligence. But within 25, 30 years, Nigerian music became culturally rooted, particularly in Yoruba language, and it has crossed every part of the world. You tune to an American radio, you listen to, our boys, the Davidos, the Wizkid, and all of that. The fundamentals of their song is in Yoruba language.
True, again.
And that is propagation of culture. So what I'm saying to you is that you need to propagate your culture. If you don't propagate your culture, it's static. And when it's static for too long, it becomes forgotten or abused.
Because essentially you define who you are Your culture defines you as an
Definitely,
identity.
yes. Your culture defines you. When you grew up as a man, nobody teaches you your culture. You grew up to understand who you are by your language, by your relationship with your parents. As a young boy, I greeted my father with my chest on the floor. And that is a mark of respect that we have in my culture. And the Nigerian culture encapsulates that in generality. The Igbo man will greet his parents with a lot of respect. The Hausa man will greet his parents with a lot of respect. So that respect part of our culture is generic. It goes across all the cultures of Nigeria. Whether you are Nupe, whether you are Tiv, whether you are Robo, whether you are Shekiri, whether you are Kanuri, whether you are what do they call the Jos Plateau people. All of these people, we have a common culture in honesty and respect. The Nigerian culture is a culture of honesty. All we needed to do was to carry this cultural element into our policy making process. But we missed the opportunity because we were colonized, and the British way of life was fostered on us. So we didn't have a choice. For instance, I understand that about a considerable part of our law is rooted in English tradition and culture. Yes. As a student of law, the fundamentals we are told is that custom and tradition are the basis of law. Correct?
Correct.
Now, if that is correct, it goes further to understand that, okay, law is a major pillar upon which governance, politics, and government is resting. Therefore, culture and tradition is an important part of governance, of government, of politics, and of lawmaking. And that is why we are proposing to our lawmakers that we need to give orientational retreat, cultural orientational retreat to our lawmakers, our diplomats, our policymakers, in line with the act that established us actually, says that all lawmakers, policymakers, diplomats must come for cultural orientational training. If you don't understand the culture of a people, you can't make laws for them. You cannot even go among them to say. That's why we have cultural exchanges among nations. Culture is key. Nigeria must begin to recognize culture as an integral part of development. If not, another 20 years we have a very serious problem if we don't address it now. And the president is interested. He's given us that brief to say culture defines everything. The path you take as a nation is as a result of how much of your culture you have been able to define. The progress you profess as a nation is as a result of how much of your culture you are able to propagate. The future you want to bequeath to your children as a country is dependent on how much culture you are able to bequeath to them.
Yes. Let me just say it clearly here, that if there's anything I doubt, it's not your passion for what you do. It's almost palpable. I mean, it's there for all to see. And I like the rather unique perspective that you're bringing into all of this. And it's something I've had time to think about over time. I like that you've talked about the imperatives for culture in governance. I particularly like that part in the early, minutes of our conversation where you said culture is not voodoo. And and when you talked about the need for our lawmakers to embrace cultural reorientation and all of that, I was tempted to ask and this is a question I've asked the lawmaker, if that lawmaker, the government official, will be willing to take the oath of office by perhaps taking one stick somewhere and swearing to Ogun or Shango or Ayelala and promising not to steal from government or public coffer. How radical do you think we can go with all of this cultural reorientation? If we have to infuse culture and tradition into corporate governance, for instance, how far and expansive do you think some of these cultural reforms can be embraced or, infused into governance, for instance?
It depends on leadership. We thank God we have a leader today who sees culture as an instrument.
Or do you consider that backward?
No, it's not backward. President Obasanjo had an essay on culture, Professor Abimbola, Wande Abimbola, who got sworn in by a sword. Mudashiru was governor of Lagos in 1984. He got sworn in by sword. You cannot. See, let me tell you the genesis
it's possible.
of this. It's possible.
It's possible.
I've cited it.
Sorry, yes, my director is telling me to push you quickly along because we're fast running out of time. So, I mean, all of these things we've said brings me to this Nigerian new global cultural digital platform that we're all talking about now, the Dudu Plugs.
Yeah.
But I wonder how that would engender our cultural identity and, you know, clear perhaps pre-existing doubts, seeing how it is, again, that we're collaborating with the Americans on this project. And I wonder what structure this collaboration would take or is going to take so that we don't have some identity, political, you know, crisis evolving over time.
No culture exists in vacuum and in isolation. If I cite the example of the Chinese or the Japanese have pushed their culture to us. They sold their cars to us. We buy Toyota, we buy. So no culture, no culture exists in isolation.
True.
Now, we want to put our culture to global reckoning. We can't be doing everything here and expect them to see us properly.
True.
Let's take it to the center of the world.
I am eagerly looking forward to the nature and style of your agency's campaign on fostering a truly integrated nation, perhaps by building on the collective strength of our diverse and disparate ethnic nationalities. How do you intend to structure your messaging to downplay on what we see these days, you know, this projection of ethnicity in almost all of our national life, which of course is a subsisting challenge. I wonder how your campaign now intends to rather deploy ethnicity in a fusion to build nationalism, you know, and engender that togetherness, you know, that speaks to the core of the Nigerian spirit. That spirit
ethnicity,
of, yes.
Ethnicity is a political tool used by enemies to divide us. We are not a people who so much cared about ethnicity. It is a recent political tool for people who really want to divide us. Our culture is a unifying factor. If they say they are doing New Yam Festival in Ofala or Onitsha,
yes,
you leave Lagos and you go there to see it because it's cultural tourism. You don't care about whether it is your ethnic development or ethnic interest or not. If they are doing your festival in Lagos, people come from everywhere to see your festival. Don't you know people travel to Rio de Janeiro to witness that that samba
yes.
dance? So culture is a unifying factor. We just need to propagate it properly. I can assure you the kind of thing that culture can bring to the table is more than whatever you think you had gained from oil in the years. We just need to focus and propagate properly. And we are here to speak for government, to spearhead a lot of this, you know, campaign. We are coming up again with a return of our cultural value. If our cultural value was properly packaged and sold through schools, curriculum of schools, which we are trying to do now, you will see that all the decadence that erupted in our society would have been better managed. Boko Haram is the latest development. Banditry was not part of us. Kidnapping was not part of us. It is as a result of the breakdown of our cultural, you know, values as a people. We need to begin to repreach that through our children, so that the future of Nigeria can be better. We can't. The barrels of gun cannot cope. Why they cannot cope most of these problems? There are secondary, you know, solutions. There is what we call social solutions to a problem, and this is what culture is supposed to solve. By the time we bring back our cultural value, and our children and young people appreciate cultural value through their schools, through their school curriculum, you see a change in society and societal behavior towards even citizenry, nationality, patriotism, and all of the rest of it. It is culture that defines a nation. Nation does not define culture. Therefore, without a cultural identity, no country can have a national identity. True. Without a national identity, you can't have a national character. Without a national character, you can't have citizenship, patriotism, and nationalism.
This is clearly, this passion that we see is clearly is something we clearly need to replicate in other sectors. Executive Secretary and Chief Executive Officer of the National Institute for Cultural Orientation, Otumba Biodun Ajiboye, I'd like to thank you so much for coming on Insight.
Thank you.
It's been a delight, a pleasure listening to you passionately talk about this issue. There's absolutely no doubt that this is something you're passionate about. We'd like to thank you so much for the work
Pleasure is mine.
you're doing, and we look forward to seeing you here on Insight another time to perhaps continue this conversation. Thank you so much indeed for coming on the program.
Thank you. Pleasure.
On this episode of the program, to join us same time next week for more on Insight. My name is Nnamdi Odipo.
And I'm Elizabeth Omori. We'll see you next week. Be your brother's keeper. Bye for now.